Hello. Today, we're talking about something that I know that maybe quite a few of you might be struggling with, and that is perfectionism. I know that I'm not the only one. I know that most of my clients are either perfectionists or recovering perfectionists. And if you are someone who's struggled with food and restrictions and trying to be quote unquote good, then chances are that there's at least part of you that is going to really benefit from this conversation. So I'm going to talk to you about how breaking free from my perfectionism trap really helped me find true freedom, not just in food or in body or exercise, but in all areas of my life. Let's get into it. Welcome to the Live Unrestricted podcast, a show where you'll learn how to heal your relationship with food and your body so that you can focus your time and energy on more important things like your personal growth. I'm your host, Sabrina Magna, food freedom coach, and my mission is to help make your life happier and healthier without stress, overwhelm, or guilt about food. If you love the show, please do go out and share it. And if you're looking for support with your relationship with food, details about my programs are in the show notes. Thanks for spending time with me today. Now let's jump in. Today, you and I are diving into a topic that I know so many of you can relate to, and that is perfectionism. And more importantly, the challenge that comes with being able to live in the gray. Let me tell you, this is something that I'm constantly rewiring my brain around, and I'm helping my clients do the same because we live in a society where we like to have rules. We like to have the right or the wrong, the black or the white, right? Like we really like to put ourselves in buckets and labels. And that gives us a sense of certainty. That gives us a sense of identity. And what's a really interesting thing that I've learned about perfectionism in the past few years, because I work with my own coaches. And as you can imagine, when I'm in a container with all of these really ambitious, high-level business owners, perfectionism tends to show up quite a bit. And what I've learned about perfectionism is that it's really a subtle way that fear shows up in our lives. And so we're going to talk about that today. And I wanted to bring up this topic because I was thinking, okay, we're around the holidays right now, right? We're heading into this crazy busy period. And during the holidays, I want to talk about topics that are going to be really relevant for you, that are going to help you enjoy the holidays in a way that you can relax, you can give yourself some grace. And I know that personally, when I look back on the holidays that I spent when I was deep in my disordered eating, one big thing that was super hard for me to grapple with was the fact that I wasn't going to be perfect. I was so used to controlling everything. So it got to a point where I was making everything at home. I didn't want to go to restaurants because I didn't know what was going to be in my food. I wanted to make sure that everything I was doing just right. Same for my exercise routine. I wanted to be at the gym the same day, the same time, and do the quote unquote right or perfect workout, even though, as you know, like that literally does not exist. So when you're thrown into the holidays, your routine, your sense of quote unquote control is gone. And so if you're still holding on to this idea that you need to do everything just right or perfectly, then you're setting yourself up to spend the next few weeks feeling like you're failing, feeling like you're doing something wrong. And so really being able to master the art of being comfortable living in the gray is so incredibly important and powerful. So I really wanted to bring this conversation to you in this time when I know that perfectionism can rear its ugly head. And really what this conversation actually was a conversation that I had on another podcast. So I was asked to be a guest on the Full and Thriving podcast with a colleague of mine, Meg McCabe, and she asked me all about my perfectionism perfectionism and how it showed up in my life and my orthorexia around food. And really, like I said, one of the biggest lessons and breakthroughs that I've had, which was to learn how to live in the gray, and how that flexibility has just completely changed the way that I approach my goals and improved my mental health and created a more balanced and sustainable way of living. So grab a cup of coffee or get comfy on your walk and let's chat about breaking free from perfectionism and how it might just change your life. I am so good and excited to be talking to you about this topic that is very relevant to probably a lot of your listeners.
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm so excited to be talking to you too. First of all, because you're a fellow podcaster. And second of all, this is a fabulous topic. And for those of you just joining us, we are going to dive into a conversation about perfectionism and living in the gray as it relates to life and maybe even a little bit of recovery. And before we do that, Sabrina, I'd love to hear a little bit about your personal and professional background.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to try to make this a long story short, but this is also going to help you and your listeners understand why perfectionism was something that was a struggle for me for the majority of my life. And so my story kind of started when I was about 8 years old and I became a high-level synchronized swimmer. And that is a sport that is highly focused on perfection and thinness and the way that your body looks. And, you know, you can make the parallel with ballet. It's very similar in that sense. And so I had these very ingrained beliefs around what was a quote unquote good body. And also on top of that, I come from a family of overachievers. So I'm the youngest of 5 kids and everyone in my family is really good at sports, really good in school. My dad is like this genius. And so it almost felt like in order to be seen and in order to get my parents' attention, like I needed to achieve. I needed to get good grades. I needed to be good at my sport. I needed this sense of perfection, even though like no one told me that. It just got ingrained in me. And then when I retired from the sport at 16 years old, I was so terrified of gaining weight because the past 8 years, I lived in a world where it's always about your body and the way that you look and having a thigh gap and having a 6-pack. And so my worth was really tied up into how I looked. And so I started doing what anyone else would do. I started going on the internet and seeing what should I cut out and what should I do in order to maintain or to lose weight. And this really spiraled into years of disordered eating and eventually developing an eating disorder, orthorexia, which is this unhealthy obsession with being healthy. And, you know, you see perfectionism traits in that a lot. And long story short, after 6-7 years of binge eating, hating my body, a lot of anxiety and stress around food and around exercise and the way that I look and losing my social life and just like really becoming super unhealthy, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally. I really hit this rock bottom where I started thinking about the life that I wanted to live in my future. I was in my early 20s at the time. And I was holding myself back from doing so many things. Like I was scared to go to the restaurant. I didn't want to travel. I didn't want to be around people. Like there was so much crippling anxiety around how eating would affect my weight. And I really thought about the kind of life I wanted to live. And I wanted to travel and I wanted to be spontaneous and adventurous. And none of that would be possible if I kept living the way that I was living at the time. So I ended up going on a trip to Italy, which really made me challenge my beliefs, my rules, all of my controlling nature around food. And it kind of planted the seed, making me realize how important your relationship with food is, like not the food itself, but the way that you think about food, the way you feel around it. And at that time, it was extremely toxic and extremely negative. So I came back from that trip and I really started getting obsessed with learning everything there is to know about your relationship with food and intuitive eating and the psychology of behavior change. And I mean, this has been happening for years now. And then 4 years ago, I decided to get certified as a holistic health coach, start my business, and help women who were struggling with the things that I was struggling with and that I felt so alone and so ashamed and broken about. And so that's what I've been doing for the past 4 years. And I absolutely love it, as I'm sure, Meg, that you can relate to as well.
Wow. So first of all, I was a swimmer too, not a synchronized swimmer, but I love hearing that is part of your journey and part of your story. My eating disorder was kind of tied up into swimming a bit as well, but I do find it very interesting, that evolution. Like, I feel like when I think about perfectionism, orthorexia comes up right away, right? Could you explain how that link between orthorexia and perfectionism showed up for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So it got to a point, right? There were years of my pattern was I would eat clean all week and then I would binge either at night or on the weekends. And then what really triggered the orthorexia, which is kind of funny now that I look at it, is getting my Fitbit. Because when I got my Fitbit, now I'm a very numbers analytical girl. And so now I could calculate everything. I could calculate how many calories I was burning a day, or, the estimate. I could count how many steps I was taking every day, my heart rate, right? Like all of those numbers. Plus, combined with my Fitness Pal, I was able to track every single calorie that I was eating. So at that point, it became almost like a competition of how, quote unquote, healthy can I get? And my mindset really was more is always more. More exercise is always better, more healthy, more restriction, more rules, less, quote unquote, junk food. So it really was about how perfect can I be around exercise, around food. And it really became my identity. Like I saw myself as the healthy friend, the disciplined girl. And I mean, no one, I know looking back on it, no one like loved me because I was disciplined. No one was like, oh, Sabrina's so awesome to have around because she works out every day. But it really felt like part of my personality, like the girl who's at the gym every morning at 6 a.m., who only eats the salads, but then I would go home and obviously I would binge because I tried to have like this healthy persona, and that's not sustainable. So it really was this like go all in, go to the extremes without any like concern with how it was affecting my mental health, any concerns about long-term implications or sustainability. So that's really how the orthorexia, which is this like unhealthy obsession with what goes into your food and your portions and like the cleanness of your food, it was all about how perfect can I be instead of how sustainable, how balanced, and like, how can I live a life that is truly, genuinely, holistically healthy?
Yeah. One thing you kind of experienced, which I've never really thought of it this way, is perfectionism is often competition against yourself, right? You're like, how can I do better, be better? Never finding that satisfaction in what you've done or what you've achieved, which is why the temperament of a perfectionist is so easily taken to the extreme, where maybe something that starts as a quote innocent diet becomes this extreme eating disorder. I know that was the case for me growing up. Like I just felt this need to always do better, like make the numbers less, or right. There's always a new achievement to be unlocked in the unhealthy direction.
Have you read the book, The Gap and the Gain?
No, I have not.
Okay. So what you're talking about really makes me think of this concept, which is like, I'm a very visual person. So let's say that you start at the starting line and you have a goal, and that's like the goal line that's a little bit, far away. And as you make progress towards that goal, what tends to happen, especially for like high achieving perfectionist people, is that you're making progress towards that goal, but the goalpost keeps moving.
Mm-hmm.
And not only does it keep moving, making your standards and your goals unrealistic and literally unachievable, but you're also really hurting yourself, because instead of looking at how much progress you've done, like the gain between the starting line and where you are right now, you're looking at the gap between where you are right now and where your goal is. So, and because your goal just keeps moving, there's always more to do. There's more perfection to achieve. You constantly feel like you're not enough because you're so far away from where you want to be.
Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh. I love that. I haven't heard it articulated in that way. I'm definitely going to check out that book. But as a person who's lived with perfectionism in the past and sometimes now, I can totally relate to not acknowledging all of the accomplishments I've made, minimizing those. I see that in my clients all the time with recovery. They get really far in recovery, but it's never enough, right?
Yeah.
And if we look at where they were 6 months ago, it's a light year away from where they started, but the acknowledgement isn't there because they're always looking at like the mountain ahead.
Yeah. And it's really a recipe for pain and for suffering, because it's so interesting. We think that if we look at how far we have left to go, if we like put all this pressure on ourselves and we keep raising the bar, we think that it's going to make us go faster, and we think that it's going to be like beneficial. But most of the time, all it does is it slows us down, because we're focusing on the things that we're not doing right and the things that we're missing or that we're not good enough on. And whatever you focus on, you get more of. So if you're focusing on your failures and you're focusing on your mistakes, you best believe you are going to keep seeing your failures and your mistakes. And until you change the wiring in your brain and you change the way that you perceive yourself, your goals, your achievements, you will constantly feel like you're not enough.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's like you want to focus on the good sometimes. We can't just keep minimizing our achievements. But I think, where it gets nuanced is that this perfectionism has like a dark side. Like perfectionism has a light side, right? Which is like, you can achieve the things. If you have a healthy mindset and you're doing things while taking care of yourself and acknowledging your needs, you can achieve a lot. But then there's that dark side, which you fell into, of I'm a perfectionist who's not even taking into consideration my own well-being and mental health. Yeah. So what was it like for you to have this identity that was totally tied up with perfectionism and being this like elite health person? How is that?
Well, what's interesting is that this kind of mindset I had to work through as I was going through recovery and, learning to live in the gray and learning to take rest days from exercise. But then it started showing up in my work, where there's this constant fear of failure and this avoidance of self-judgment. And that's really where the negative perfectionism comes in, is that it's not about striving for achievement and coming from this positive intention, but it's coming from this negative place where if you don't achieve it, then your self-esteem suffers and the way that you feel about yourself suffers. And so that's really how it would show up for me, is just this crippling anxiety, because I always felt like I needed to be doing something. Like I always felt like I needed to be productive, working towards my goal. If I'm just watching TV and allowing myself to relax, there would be this anxiety to a point that I stopped watching TV because I just couldn't do it. Like I would sit and then there'd be all these thoughts about all these things that I should be doing. And you can probably relate to this, Meg, which is like this constant voice of shoulds in your mind.
Yes. Yep.
I should be doing something. I should be doing something differently. So for me, it was just this constant feeling of being on a hamster wheel, where you are always behind and you're never doing enough and there's always more to do. And it was only when I gave myself unconditional permission to be accepting of my present reality and be kind of compassionate into where I am today. And also knowing that there are still goals that I want to achieve. There's still so much that I want to do. And I'm never going to be one who's going to not be ambitious and not have all these big goals. But there's no point in having these big goals if it's at the expense of my mental health and my self-esteem and how I feel about myself. Like, that's literally contradicting what the point of these goals are, which is to feel this good feeling sense about myself and my life.
I think that's great. So what I'm hearing almost is that you learn almost to live with an and reality. Like, I have all of these dreams and ambitions. I am an ambitious person, period.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to remain present with myself and honor myself. Even if there is that gap that I see,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to be putting my mental health behind, its proper place in life. So I love that. That's kind of an interesting articulation of the gray, right? This concept of living in the gray, which I'd love for you to share more about. But I think it's a good place to start of finding those and statements, right? Like being able to accept I am ambitious. I do have high expectations for myself and I honor myself.
Yes, absolutely. And one of the things I always tell my clients is that self-acceptance and self-improvement are not mutually exclusive. And so a lot of people are afraid that, especially if we're talking recovery and body image healing, I'm afraid that if I accept my body and I accept where I am right now, that I'm never going to want to change and I'm never going to want to improve myself. And what's funny is that the opposite happens, because one of the biggest pieces of work that I do with my clients is helping them learn how to love themselves. And it's not this sexy thing, like lose 30 pounds in a month. But the thing is that it's literally the foundation, because if you think about people in your life, the people that you love the most, that you just have unconditional love for, your partner, your kids, your parents, you will do anything. You will go out of your way to make them smile, to make them happy. And it makes you happy to do it because you love them. So you care for them naturally, versus the people in your life who have not been kind to you, who don't deserve your love, who don't deserve your care, who you don't have these positive feelings for, and they ask you for help. You might do it begrudgingly, but you're not happy to do it. You're not going to go out of your way to care for them. And so if you kind of turn the picture on yourself, why would you genuinely, authentically want to take care of yourself if there's no love, there's no acceptance there? You won't. It's always going to feel like a chore. It's always going to feel like something that you should be doing. And then you're going to self-sabotage. You're not going to genuinely, it's not going to be authentic. It's not going to be intrinsic. It's going to be, I'm doing it because this is what I should be doing, not because I deserve this.
Wow. I like how you can take that unconditional love for people and that feeling of I naturally want to do this for someone because I love them.
Mm-hmm.
And then looking in and being like, no wonder I have such a hard time doing things in the name of self-love for myself, because it doesn't come natural to me. I'm actually quite mean to myself.
Mm-hmm.
So how does somebody end up finding that self-love? I think the self-love, the authentic self-love, is a really good place to heal perfectionism, right? Because there is that level of acceptance and compassion that's rarely in perfectionism, right? Like that is a place hard to go sometimes. So how do you get your clients to start actually turning that love towards themselves and feeling it within?
So the first thing that I will say that's really important is just understanding that it has to be a non-negotiable And it's not just like important to your healing, but it's necessary, because we live in a culture that is constantly telling us that we are wrong for loving ourselves. If we love our bodies and it's not the perfect body, what are you doing? Like, you should be wanting to lose weight. I actually saw this reel on Instagram a couple of weeks ago, and it was someone who posted a video who was saying, this is what it looks like to live with authentic self-love. And she was explaining like what she feels and what she thinks about herself on a daily basis. And it was just like this very healthy relationship with herself. And the comments had me laughing because people were like, is this real? Like, do people actually live this way? And like, it has become abnormal. Like, you're an outlier if you live in a space where you actually love yourself and you have a healthy relationship with yourself. So when you can understand that, that's where it has to start, because when you actually have a healthy relationship with yourself, everything around you is going to benefit. So when you're constantly thinking about how can I be there for my kids? How can I bend over backwards for my kids or my husband or the people around me in my job? If you don't realize, and this is such a cliche, that you cannot pour from an empty bucket, you're going to continue. It's not going to be authentic. It's also not going to be sustainable. And you're not going to show up as the best version of yourself. And I know, like, I see it in myself all the time on days where I'm not being kind to myself. It's really hard to receive love from the people around me. It's hard to give love to the people around me. So the first thing is really like, give yourself permission to work on this. Like, give yourself permission to actually start loving yourself, regardless of what you've done in your past, regardless of what you're living with right now, or all of the failures that you think that you have, because focusing on that is actually not helping you. Because when you live in the past, what you're doing is you're bringing the past into your present, right? Because you're replaying the same thoughts and you're feeling the same emotions from your past. And so every day, I think science shows that like 80 to 85% of your thoughts are the same as yesterday. And so if you're not intentional about changing the thoughts that you have today, well, what's going to happen is tomorrow, you're going to be the same person as you were today, which is the same person as you were yesterday. So it really is about being intentional and saying, now I'm going to pay special attention to the thoughts that I have about myself, the beliefs that I keep holding on to, and the feelings that I keep feeling about myself. And awareness is the very first step, which most people don't have. They just know that they feel terrible about themselves. But when they actually look at the things they say to themselves on a daily basis and even practice saying it out loud, they're going to realize, oh my goodness, I can't believe all of that, self-talk was happening on a subconscious level every single day. I can't believe how mean I am to myself.
Yeah. Wow. I just want to pause there and say the point of permission that you brought up is so obvious sometimes when I'm talking to my clients, because I will say, let's write just 5 self-compassionate thoughts down together, or 5 kind things about yourself. And I would say 75% of people start with, I can't think of anything. It's like,
same.
And then I say, well, think of it as a creative writing exercise. And then they still won't let themselves go there. And it's a permission problem. So then we go into, so why is it hard to give yourself permission to say something kind about yourself or speak with compassion? And that's where you really get into like the mental healing component and like digging into that a little bit more. But permission is totally key, because if you're someone who's saying, oh, I have no idea how to do that, maybe it's because you're not allowing yourself to go there.
Yeah, I I love that you do that exercise with your clients. I've had that exact same response of like, sometimes I'll give them a homework, which is every day, just write 3 things that have nothing to do with your body that you appreciate about yourself. And 3 things for 7 days, that is a lot for them to even think about. And there's an exercise which your listeners could do, which I actually gave to my clients last week. And I did this with myself a few months ago, which made me realize the power of this. I do a lot of my writing and my journaling by the water. It just like strikes something inside of me. And I thought, what if I were to write like a love letter to myself, but from the perspective of my boyfriend? So he is someone who loves me so unconditionally, and he sees things in myself that I don't always see. So I thought, what if I were to write this as if my boyfriend was describing me? And what's interesting is there were so many things that came up that I wouldn't have been able to come up with if I was writing it from my own perspective, because I'm so overly critical, and it's something that I'm working on. But there is that hesitation of like, oh my God, am I conceited? Is it cocky to be writing all of this? But so when you do it from the point of view of someone who loves you so much unconditionally, who will brag about you until they can't anymore, it could be your husband, it could be your kids, it could be your sister or your mom, or there is someone in your life who admires you. Write a letter about yourself from that person's perspective. It's going to be a real eye-opener for you.
Wow. Yeah, that's such a great exercise. I'm going to do that myself, see how it goes.
You should. Please do, and let me know how it goes.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, so fun. And, of course, I'm always thinking of the people who are still saying, well, I can't access that. I can't access that. And it's like, again, we need to be intentional here, which was your other point, which is in order to heal, we need to be intentional about changing the thoughts we have about ourselves. And like, I think I've heard on average, we think about 60,000 thoughts a day, which is a lot. Crazy. A lot of those are repetitive. So you are so right in saying you can't just wake up one day and have all of these brand new thoughts ingrained. You really have to bring in the intention and say, even though it doesn't feel accessible to me right now, I will work on it. Right. Yeah. And I will make it accessible. This is not impossible.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think you've just brought up some amazing points. I am curious about the concept of living in the gray and how that relates to perfectionism in life and in recovery. So I'd love for you to kind of add your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So when you were saying that, what came up intuitively is this graphic that I shared with my clients and was really impactful for them. And it's related to this concept, which is what people think consistency means is there's 7 cups of water, for meaning Monday to Sunday, and all of the cups of water are filled to the brim, 100%. And actually what consistency means is one day it might be at 60%. And then this next day it's at 30%. And then the next day is at 50%. And consistency means just showing up for yourself every day and doing the best that you can with the resources that you have. And so when it comes to living in the gray, I'll use the example of exercise because this is something that I've done a lot of healing on. I used to be the half marathon runner. I used to work out 2 hours a day, 7 days a week. I bragged about how I never took rest days. And it was coming from a place not of like, I love working out, but anxiety and perfectionism. And what does it mean for me to take a day where I'm not working out? Like, what does it mean about my discipline and my identity? So now I live in a place where I have the new identity of I am someone who moves my body every day. And that really lowers the bar because that can mean I stretch. It could mean I go for a 10-minute walk. I do a workout because I feel like it. I'll do something I enjoy, like swim or dance, but I am someone who moves my body every day. So that on those days where I'm like this morning, full of energy, I'm going to go do a boxing class. But tomorrow, chances are I'm going to feel pretty tired from today's class. And so showing up and living in the gray means that it's okay to do a 5-minute walk. It's okay to not always be at 100%, because if you want to do anything consistently, you can't have this like, it's not a sprint. You cannot sprint forever. And no matter what, whether it's with food where you are trying to be perfect every day and then you end up binging after a few days or a few weeks, or it's with exercise where you go to the gym for 2 weeks straight and then you can't walk and you're exhausted, or it's with work where you try to overwork and not take any breaks, you will burn out at one point or another. And so it's deciding, do I want to keep living my life on this roller coaster where I'm constantly either on or I'm off? Or do I want to live my life in a balance where I'm showing up every day, I'm doing the best with the resources that I have, and I'm giving myself compassion on those days where, you know what, today is not 100%. Today might be like a 30% type of day, but that's okay because tomorrow might be 70. And if it's not, then the day after that might be 70. But the goal is not 100% every single day. That's literally impossible. You're setting yourself up for failure.
Yes. Oh, so powerful. I think that imagery of the cups with water as well, it's really true. Showing up for yourself is not, I don't know, I'm just imagining drinking that full glass every single day. It's recognizing some days you might not get to the whole thing. As far as that goes, the word that comes to my mind is flexibility, right? Like learning to live in the gray is recognizing that you can show up for yourself consistently, but allow yourself to be flexible in how you do that. So for you, someone who moves your body every day, that's going to look like, I don't know, 20-minute yoga video on YouTube versus a boxing class. There's a lot of flexibility within there. And I think that's so important to think about when it comes to perfectionism, living in the gray, and recognizing that 10 out of 10 intensity is just not sustainable.
Absolutely. And one of the biggest things that helped me get into that gray and into that flexible mode is realizing that, let's say, moving my body, it's not about this goal anymore, right? Like this goal of looking a certain way, but it's about becoming the kind of person that takes care of herself in a way that is going to be long-term. Same for food. It's what kind of person do you want to become, not just, 3 months from now, but 50 years from now. I am someone who is very lucky. My dad is a very big long-term thinker, right? So he's an accountant, and at a very early age, I learned about compound interest. And the earlier you can start, the better off you're going to be years from now. And he's always had the mentality of, I want to move my body. I want to keep myself healthy so that when I'm 70 or 80 years old, I can still be around for my grandchildren. And it really that mindset got ingrained in my mind of, it's really not about now, but it's about 50 years from now, and starting with the end in mind and then working backwards to how is that going to look like for me on a daily basis.
And it's so true, because you can't really have that sustainable long-term health if you're constantly running yourself to the ground. And that's what I see in my clients all the time. There is this conversation of short-term gratification versus big picture, long-term vision that comes up a lot. And so even though it's really hard, as someone who maybe exercises 10 out of 10 intensity every day, it's really hard in the immediate future to sit with that discomfort. But if we're looking at how to become the person who is balanced and recovered and healed, we want you to embrace those rest days, and we want you to embrace that flexibility.
And I love that you brought that up, Meg, the short-term gratification versus long-term big picture, because it's true that it's so much easier to think about the short term. And one of the things that I always teach my clients is, how can we create a short-term gratification with long-term goals? So, for example, when it comes to moving your body, a lot of people, especially if you have a history of yo-yo dieting and body image issues, you associate exercise with losing weight. And so it's really hard for you to want to stay consistent with exercise, because if you're doing your workout and then you're not seeing the weight loss the next day, then there's this idea of like, what's the point of even doing this? And so when you can create short-term gratification for yourself, in the sense of, for me, when I'm thinking about what do I want to do this morning, what's going to make me feel good, I really ask myself, how am I going to feel afterwards? Because I've brought a lot of attention to the positive aspects of exercise that I can feel immediately, which is I have more energy, I'm more clear-minded, I'm more focused for the day. I find that it really sets my habits up for the day. And so there's all of these things that I know is going to be instantly felt by me. And so even though I'm not going to reap the benefits of working out every day until I'm in my old age, right now, it's beneficial for me on a daily basis in how I feel and how I show up in the world.
Yes, I love that. I think that's so applicable to almost anything you're doing, where it's harder to do in the moment, but recognizing there are some rewards attached that you might not have noticed. Like, for instance, maybe you are in recovery and you've decided you're going to commit to your meal plan fully. And then you're not fully recovered just by doing that a few days, but maybe you're starting to sleep better. That's an immediate like reward that you can seek while keeping the big picture in mind.
Yes, exactly. You have more energy. You can focus a little bit more on a daily basis. That's such a good example.
Yeah. Wow. I love that. And I think you've brought up so many great examples of like what living in the gray looks like, how to break past perfectionism. And I guess as we kind of wrap up this episode, I'm very curious to know, for someone who's just starting out their journey, like maybe they've recognized I am a perfectionist, help. What would you say is this like the starting point for someone who wants to become more balanced?
So I would say the first thing is start noticing when that all or nothing mentality starts to creep in. As you said before, awareness is, as unsexy as it is the first step, because most people are not aware of their thoughts. And when I start working with women, and within the first few weeks, I always hear the same thing, which is, I never realized how negatively I spoke to myself. And we kind of know it, right? Like we always say, I don't love myself. But if you really listen to the voice in your head and the things that it's saying to you, that's going to be the first step. And it can look like journaling on it at the end of the day, right? Like, okay, if you're not feeling good about yourself, if you're feeling a lot of judgment, write down some of the reasons why. Like, what are the things that are happening internally? And it could be, I didn't do this today. I wasn't good at this. I failed at this. And just start noticing, okay, what am I focusing on? Like, what's my view of the world? What's the filter through which I'm seeing my own life? And then the second step is really just having that compassion. All right, so let's say that I can create distance between me and me. And it could be that you pretend that this is a really good friend who's talking to you. What would you say to that person in order to make them feel slightly better? And I like the idea of, what is a slightly better thought? And it needs to feel true to you, right? So I love affirmations. I think that they're really useful, but I think what people get wrong about affirmations is they'll say things that they don't actually believe, that don't feel true to them. So it's almost like you're gaslighting yourself and then you feel bad because you don't believe it. So what I always say is like, it's kind of like a shirt that you try on and see if it fits or not. And so it could be all of these different reframes that you try. So let's say one of the examples is I didn't get enough done today, right? So you had all these things on your to-do list. I didn't get enough done today. I was so lazy and so unproductive. What's wrong with me? All right, let's try something a little bit compassionate, like, well, look at all of the things that I did get done, right? Like, yeah, there are some things that I didn't get done, but let's look at the things that I did get done. And are there maybe some things that I'm disregarding about the reasons why I couldn't, right?
Yes.
Maybe something happened, an unexpected event or phone call, which got in the way of your day, your kid was sick, whatever it is. And so how can we start changing the perspective on events and looking at it from a place of, okay, if this was someone that I really loved, how would I be looking at that situation?
Yeah. I think that's great. I feel the same exact way about affirmations, where like sometimes I will write affirmations that are just on the way towards the goal thought, like not quite the thought that's not believable, but that gray zone thought almost like,
yeah.
Like instead of I love my body, which is like the PhD thought of body image, it's like I'm working towards body acceptance. Maybe that's way more tangible.
Yeah.
So I think that is really helpful. And then I wanted to highlight another piece you brought up, which is acknowledging the things you didn't plan for in your day. So when you set those goals and you didn't get your to-do list done, I find compassion is sometimes having your own back.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, so I didn't get everything I needed done today. Look at everything I did do. And honestly, how could I have? When my grandma called and we talked for an hour, and I value family, so that's totally okay. Or like this thing came up with a client that I had to attend to immediately. Having your own back in a sense of being able to see everything in context.
Yes. Yeah. And the last thing I want to say, which is going to be kind of an experiment for your listeners, is I know that sometimes it can be really hard to start shifting this mindset because it doesn't feel safe. It doesn't feel safe to do it. Yeah. You're afraid that you're going to let yourself off of the hook too much and that you're going to get lazy and complacent. So what I really like to do for myself is when I'm going after a new way of thinking or I'm trying something new is I like to do short-term experiments because it doesn't feel as scary because I'm like, you know what? If I try this for 3 months and it doesn't go as planned, then that's just 3 months, right? So why don't you give yourself, make it an experiment, like a 3-month, 3-week, however feels good for you experiment. Say, you know what? For the next month or so, I'm going to, every time I notice myself being harsh, being a perfectionist, having that all or nothing, I will be intentional about reframing. And my goal is to have as much compassion, as much acceptance and understanding towards myself. And let's say at the end of the month, you don't feel better and you didn't achieve more or whatever might be your goals with this experiment, you can go back. You can go back to being your own bully. You can go back to how you were doing it before. But chances are, if you're listening to this and if you can relate to this conversation, it's probably because it's not working for you.
Yeah, that is such a solid piece of advice to create that sense of safety. Like you can always run back to the old patterns. And just by telling yourself that, it makes it easier to let go because you're like, yeah, I have this commitment. I can look back at it. And yeah, you're 10 out of 10. Well, I don't know. That's a fact I'm just throwing out there. But most of the time, if you have shown up for yourself in a compassionate way and you are practicing the things that, you know, Sabrina, you've shared, after that month, you're probably going to feel the difference if you're consistent enough. And so that's a great final piece of advice / words of wisdom you shared today. So thank you for that. And Sabrina, I just wanted to say thank you so much for being on the show. This was really exciting to talk about. I know that the listeners are going to just devour this because it was just such a helpful topic. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I love talking about this and you're awesome as well. I'm sure that you understand everything that I just shared and you've been through it as well. So thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you found it valuable, I would love if you would share it with someone you know that could benefit. If you're loving the show, don't forget to subscribe over on Apple Podcasts so you don't miss a single episode. I really love hearing feedback from you, so please leave a rating and review over on Apple to help us get in the ears of more people who need it the most. Finally, come hang out with me on Instagram at Sabrina Magna Health for more educational content and get up close and personal with me. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you on the next episode.